And welcome back to Open Your Eyes on a cool Wednesday morning with all these nice colors. Yes, we're loving it. We're loving it. But we've got some important topics to actually talk about. The first one is actually understanding domestic violence and reporting them. There's so many videos going around of men hitting on women or men treating women or peers like they're animals. And I'll tell you, Audrey, I'd go as far as to say that's not the way you even treat a living being. It doesn't matter who or what it is. You're supposed to be much more courteous. But we tend to want to take advantage of other people's feelings and do what we want and how we feel about it. Like we mentioned, and for this first segment, we'll dive into understanding domestic violence and how we could report them. In with us, we've got Cynthia Williams, who is the Executive Director at the National Women's Commission. Cynthia, a very pleasant morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning to both of you. And really, I would like to thank you for inviting me. I think it's extremely important for the conversation to continue at different levels. And even though there might not be appearances of persons who are working in the field, let me just say that the work continues. And so it's really a good opportunity for us to come on board on these type of platforms and speak about what it is to increase awareness and to help people understand the dynamics, as well as help them know what is available in terms of protection and support system. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. One of the things that I continue to stress on a daily basis is always a buy-in. A buy-in simply means that we understand the situation. And as long as we could understand, that's when we'll have a better, as long as we better understand, that's when it will spawn to us exactly how to do, what to do, why to do, and when to do. First and foremost, we want to understand what is domestic violence.
Okay. Well, domestic violence here in Belize is defined as violence that is inflicted on a person by a person of that person's household. Belize is very unique in the way that it has approached domestic violence, specifically through its legislation, because it allows it is including everyone in the family. It also includes persons in visiting relationships, for example, boyfriend and girlfriend, and it also includes persons who have been in relationship within that household even though they have left. So former common laws, former husbands, and that sort of thing. So Belize is unique in that sense. In other countries, the aspect of domestic violence only includes intimate partner violence. So we've kind of expanded the definition because we know what happens within our households. Having said that, it also includes, for example, violence that persons can perpetrate on their parents as well once the person is living within that household. So that is one of the key difference in Belize. But beyond that, and I know that the conversation was going to, in so many ways, focus on domestic violence, but also I would like to expand it a bit more to the issue of gender-based violence, because domestic violence is one of the forms. And so we have the aspect of sexual violence that also happens within intimate partner relationships and within the homes, but also looking at the aspect of the community, the sexual violence, such as sexual harassment and rape. And it's important for us to really keep on talking about the different forms that exist, because often that in some ways hinders people as well from understanding the other areas and other forms that people also experience.
You will admit, though, that our legislation does not give room, our domestic violence legislation, does not give room for where the person is neither your boyfriend or previously in your household or in your household. It may just be a neighbor who has sexually abused you or harassed you. It could just be an acquaintance. We don't have that provision for it. It's one of the challenges I've met in courts. I mentioned to you before the start of the show that I actually saw a video where two men, nothing I'm told related to the child, actually have this young lady, both of them sexually assaulting her.
Wow.
And so in that case, she may not want to go to the police, but yet she cannot even bring a restraining order against them because they're not a member of their household, they're not a previous boyfriend, they're not anyone falling within the legislation. So knowing that, don't you think it's time for the Women's Commission to expand that definition? Because not everybody wants to go to court to have a rape case, but everybody may want a restraining order, which is another level of protection before you can mentally deal with what happened to you.
And Audrey, in that specific case that you're talking about, there are several things that we have to at least know to be able to say. Because if the child is a minor, it's 16, below 16, already the state has the duty to protect that child. And so that's where the Department of Human Services steps in terms of investigating. I do agree with you in terms of the need for amendment or revision of legislations to be able to provide greater protections for people across the board. And it's something that with the National Committee for Families and Children, the National Women's Commission is working on looking at the various legislations that exist and reviewing them and providing suggestions, recommendations, how we can improve, strengthen those legislations to ensure that whoever is being left out can also be protected. And so that is a process that is ongoing. And Audrey, you know that is quite actually very tedious, because one of the things that we do through the policy and legislative subcommittee of the National Committee for Families and Children is taking, for example, the FACA is taking criminal code, is taking domestic violence and going through it in detail and looking, okay, who are we leaving out? Who are we missing, and how can we strengthen it? So definitely we are aware of it, and it's a process that is undergoing. We are going through it at the moment to look at how then does the National Committee for Families and Children or the National Women's Commission, because our mandates are different, but they're still similar, or there are linkages within our mandates, then we can bring those recommendations to government as policy advisory bodies.
One of the other areas of concern to me is that presently, the way the legislation is written for the criminal code is that you, the female or the victim, because there are men who are victims, must cooperate with the police and be willing to give a statement, which then is very difficult to ever get a conviction, because if we understand abuse and violence, you, the victim, seldom have the strength to speak up against your abuser. And the recent video with the Big Tom incident, we're told that the young lady is not willing to cooperate, but you have to put yourself in her position. You don't just cooperate for something like that. There's a lot at stake for you. We don't know. Your life may be at risk. And so one of the things I would like to see is for there to be a push where the legislation is amended so that you don't have to be the person that go and make the complaint or even cooperate, that the images can speak for themselves.
Yes.
Because there's a principle in law where you can say that I can consent, but I cannot consent to harm against me. It's an old common law principle that needs to be encoded in the legislation. Have you all thought about pushing for that aspect where we have incidents where the parents don't want to help the children to continue with the case? I used to see a lot of that, where the women, they don't want to go and participate in the process because they're afraid, and where even the men or boys don't want to also participate, and so the person gets away with a non-conviction, which is terrible, because then those same perpetrators keep on perpetrating the same crimes.
Yeah, so have you thought of that? That's the question.
Yes, actually that conversation started way back from 2009, before the current domestic violence legislation was approved. And this is where it really takes everybody to be to engage, and in terms of advocating for that. I've been having discussions recently with the police department, with different attorneys, with even the Attorney General's ministry, in looking at what are the things that could be done, what are the legislations that need to be amended to allow that to happen. Because somewhere, I believe in terms of the Constitution, I believe in trying to get exactly the legislation where it indicates that, the accused has the right to face the accuser. And in those instances, that's what limits from the state actually taking on the cases and becoming the virtual complainant, because at the end of the day, it has to be a complainant. And if those persons don't report, then the police or the prosecution really can't do anything. And that really is where the work has to be done from a multi-pronged approach, because while that work is being done in terms of amendment of legislation or looking at what needs to be changed, we also need to do the work with persons who are experiencing the violence with different institutions. And through and that is some of the work that has been happening for a while, but over the last 2 years, we've been really trying to really take it at a stronger position in terms of bringing in the different players and letting them know what are some of the things that are being considered, even getting from them. Because I think when we look at amendments, even when we look at legislation, bodies such as even the attorneys can also bring suggestions because they're the ones who use the law and who can say, well, these are some of the things who can also be improved. And I think that's a process that is very tedious because bringing people from different levels, from different backgrounds, sometimes doesn't allow for an open discussion to say this is what's going on and this is what we need to change. And so without even actually taking away from other person's responsibilities and holding each person accountable. So I do agree with you in terms of the role that the National Women's Commission can play and other bodies such as the National Committee for Families and Children, but at the time that responsibility also needs to come, or that advocacy also has to come from other bodies, because then being able to think from different ways, how do we also support those persons while the other process is ongoing to ensure that they understand these services are available. Yes, it is their choice, it is their right to make whatever decision, but at the end of the day we also have to understand that we have to be considerate, to be in a supportive mechanism. Then not having trust in the judicial system is one of the reasons why
Yes, a big
persons
part.
may choose not to make reports. Additionally, we also have to look at the issues of being financially dependent on the persons. A lot of, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to sexual violence, victims and survivors have a lot of feelings of self-blame, shame, guilt, and embarrassment. I think often, even though these type of videos appear, it further humiliates them and even makes them more afraid of what will happen if the person was able to really share the video of such an intimate experience as a way of a humiliation. What else can the person do? So the fear can increase as well, especially at the beginning. And this is something that we were trying to really work on in terms of making the various linkages, not only in terms of what is happening now. What we're seeing now is the end result, are the results of many years of violence that these persons have experienced at different levels. When they were children, when they were adolescents, the ones that they face even in school, in communities. We as a society have normalized violence. You talked about the video where the woman was being beaten at Ponyard in a public space.
Yes.
Yet nobody did anything. I haven't seen the video. I honestly don't want to see it because I can speak from cases that I dealt with when I was the Women's Department Director, or even from cases that we know of. But at the end of the day, a lot of it, yes, needs to be done from the side of the government and authorities who have the duty to do that. But there also have to be some response as well from community, family members. So that is also part of the discussion that we are also undertaking and taking with organizations and communities.
Well, the Compo had definitely came out and ridicule the others by saying, shame on you. You haven't done anything. You've been looking on at this, and
I know, I'm
it's
videoing it.
like blatantly happening in front of these guys, and nothing happened. We'll dive deeper into that. But one of the things, especially during this pandemic, that I'd like to know is if we've seen a rise of domestic violence. I could vaguely remember myself and Marlene having this conversation with relevant bodies about this situation. But Cynthia, what are we seeing? Is there a rise in domestic violence, or these violence that we're talking about here?
Yes, there has been actually, even in discussion with the Belize Crime Observatory, one of the things that they noted is that during the time of the pandemic, in comparison to last year figures, the numbers did rise. Over the last 3 years, we've had over 2,000 cases being reported, and those are only the one that reaches through the police department, the data.
Yes,
No,
yes.
we know there are so many more cases. And one of the things that definitely, in a way, hinders us is really having the data to indicate this is the situation, this is the reality, because we haven't done national surveys in Belize like other countries, and it's something that we're working towards, to be able to really get an understanding and a true picture of what is the reality, what are some of the numbers. Overall, we know that the numbers are very high. In terms of the experience that people have when it comes to sexual violence. In 2019, all the other major crimes saw a decrease, but when it came to sexual violence, there was a 37% increase in that section. So we know that that is an issue, and primarily because one of the things that we have to understand is that it has both short and long-term consequences on a victim's physical, mental, and sexual and reproductive health as well. It requires a lot of coercion and can cover really a broad spectrum and various degrees of force, and that force grows over time.
Yeah.
So the amount of manipulation, the amount of coercion that happens, by the time we see some of those incidents in public, or we see some of those where people actually call the
It's because by then it has blown up.
time, we have to understand that this really and truly are manifestations of unequal relations between men and women. And so it's just really a reflection of the power relations that exist in our community. And that is something that we have to keep at the forefront and keep discussing. It's all about power and control.
But having heard you say that, I want to go back to something you said where one of the reasons that we don't really haven't addressed the issue of having reports or dealing with cases where the victim is not willing to cooperate is because the accused must be able to face the accuser. But if I may make an observation there to you, is that the accuser does not necessarily have to be the person who is the victim. In the system you all presently have, or the country presently has, when it comes to human development, many times the accuser is an official from the department who accuses.
So I didn't get what you.
Or you're breaking up.
Yeah, we seem to be having. All right, Cynthia, you there with us?
Yes, I was trying to tell Audrey I couldn't really get what she was saying. It was breaking up.
Yes, well, I'll repeat it. What I was saying in terms of when you spoke about the accused must face its accuser, already we have a system, and I'll use the example of the Human Development Office, where the accuser does not necessarily have to be the victim. The victim is separate from the accuser. Sometimes the victim is the accuser. In the Human Development Department, a social worker can go to the courts on behalf of a victim. Often they do it on behalf of children. And so we need to look at the legislation, even on the criminal aspect, in that vein, that the person, the female, may not want to go and make a report or may not want to participate in a court proceeding, but there's enough evidence where the accuser is an official of the state who then presents the evidence. And what we need to be able to do is think outside the box as to how we do cases. I always remember the Rihanna and Chris incident where Rihanna eventually did not want to go to testify, but because the way the system is in the U.S., she did not need to testify. Chris was, what's the name of the famous guy? It's Chris, right?
Brown.
Chris Brown was still convicted because of what he had done to her. We can do that. Our system does not prevent us from doing it. I really think that maybe what all you all need is more legal minds who have been involved in the criminal aspect. And we need to look at the end of the day, what is the purpose of the Constitution? To protect the innocent, not only to give rights to the accused, but also to protect the innocent. So the discourse has to be quick, because what you were saying earlier, the long-term and the short-term effect is that we now know, for example, if a child grows up in a home and sees all that abuse, father against the mother or mother against siblings, that child is most likely to become an abuser. Right, Cynthia? That's the cycle we're dealing with. So at some point we have to bring a stop to it or address it at the root cause.
Right, and I missed a couple, so I'm not sure exactly what you were. I just heard in terms of what you were talking about. I missed quite a bit, but honestly, it's not that it hasn't been dealt with. It has come up. The discussion is there. It's simply to find ways of how to integrate, how to make those changes. And you're right in terms of saying we definitely need more attorneys who are better versed in terms of criminal law and family matters. And that again is another issue that often families face. Because even in terms of legal support, when women do want to access the court system, even that sometimes is not readily available. So you can see that as much as a lot of the responsibility does fall on government, and like what I'm saying, it's not it hasn't been done. The discussion has been there, is trying to find ways of how to amend those legislation, even in looking at recommendations.
We lost her.
All right. But yeah, I think definitely the discussion is definitely
an attorney.
All right.
What part and what role different stakeholders play.
Okay.
Well, definitely we're all stakeholders. Yes. We're all stakeholders. it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I'll tell you what I've observed, and I'm sure Cynthia has seen it too, is that during the pandemic, because people are more at home, or many have lost their jobs, so their level of dependence on a partner, or because children are not going to school and the parents have to homeschool and are frustrated, the level of violence against children and women and men too has dramatically increased, as she said, the percentage. But it has a lot to do with now, due to this pandemic, there is this level of dependency on each other. The wife may no longer be able to work, so the sole provider is the husband or the lover or the stepdad or whoever. And he knows his power there. Or the children not being able to go to the classroom, where there's a, believe it or not, going to school and in a classroom is a way out,
Safety
a relief.
mechanism.
Yes. So it is a safety mechanism.
It is.
For many of those children, right?
You know, and I
Yes. And so that's why, in terms of the responses that we now have for them, is we are able to then say we have received funding to procure additional safe spaces. So in case those women particularly, and their children need to go and they don't have nowhere else to go, now we've been able to secure funding to have one space at least in each of the districts. Know very well we have 3 shelters in the country. One of them is the one that is open for services. The others are having some issues. But I think what is important is being able to recognize, yes, that there's so much more that needs to be done. And so the focus is in trying to enhance and strengthen what is there and expand it to ensure that other persons who require protection, who require support services, also are able to access it. So that's one of the ways in which the National Women's Commission, in partnership with UNFPA, the Women's Department, and funding from the Spotlight Project, was able to secure additional spaces, at least for a period of time, and then being able to find other type of funds to continue this as well, while the shelters deal with whatever issues they have to do in terms to remain open.
What we need to do is to try and get this lesson in terms of sexual violence, domestic violence, to eradicate it on a whole, which brings me to the reporting side of things. Trusting the system is, I think, of course, the biggest part, because either you don't want for full, because it happens everywhere, no matter your income, it doesn't matter where you are. This thing is real and it's happening. But it is about getting the culprits. It is about getting those perpetrators. But then again, in order for us to get them, we need to report them. How do we stand in that particular category? Are people trusting the system? And where can they go to report these things?
Well, I mean, from what I mentioned earlier, when you look at the reported cases every year, which is over 2,000 cases, those are the ones that reach the police department. Persons a lot of times also go to the Women and Family Support Department within the Ministry of Human Development. That's the entity that is responsible to provide direct services, and they also in so many ways make reports or try to access services, because often what they want to do, they simply want to tell their story. They want to know what is available so that when they're ready or able to make that decision, they can do so. And that is one of the issues that often people don't understand. When it comes to leaving those type of relationships, or when it comes to actually making a report, even in terms of sexual violence, that person has to be ready. That person has had to go through a process internally. And often that requires support. And many times they don't have that support either from their families, either from persons who are close to them, and so it makes it more complicated, because domestic violence and sexual violence, they carries a lot of self-guilt, as I mentioned before. Often the reason they don't want to do it because they have children, or the person is known to them, and so they know that if in their report there will be additional issues with families, and in sometimes they are not believed. In other times they are re-victimized. So those are realities. In terms of what is being done, is definitely working with those authorities to be able to ensure that those persons who are at the front line are able to provide services in an empathic and in a way that is respectful and dignified. And so there are several activities that are going through different avenues. And like I said, the National Women's Commission is a coordinating entity that looks at the national response. So we know that with support of the United Populations Fund, UNFPA, we are drafting the gender-based violence referral pathway for frontline workers. So clearly defining what are the things that they need to do, and what are the other services that they can access on behalf of that client. So if the person enters through the family court or to the court, to the women's department, through the police station, or even through medical facilities, they'll be able and have the information at hand to know these are the other things that you can also do. If you're not ready to make a report to the police as yet, then you can access support services, psychosocial services through the women's department. So we're really trying to be very comprehensive and cohesive to ensure that persons have the information, because we do have people who are doing their job and as best as they can, and so we're trying to provide that information. One of the other things that we recently launched is what we call the gender-based violence complaint mechanism. And what that does is offers the opportunity for persons who are accessing services and did not receive the required services in a dignified or really denied services, they can make a complaint, which goes to the National Women's Commission. There's a subcommittee that reviews the complaints, and that is forwarded to the entity. Yes, I know that they will be concerned in terms of, well, it's going back to the same entity that's not doing anything. But the difference is that now we have somebody who is then following up on that investigation. And as a policy advisory to government, then the National Women's Commission is then able to address those concerns directly, the ministers, if it needs to be, as a policy advisory body. So that now is a new process that hopefully people will utilize. We've also entered into partnership with the post office. And so persons don't even have to have any money to get those forms. The forms will be in every post office, and they can mail it free of cost. It's a self-addressed envelope form, and the post office will deliver it to us free of cost. We have the form online as well, and it's being shared on our social media platforms as well as our website, and shared with partners so that people can also access it through their phones, and it gets to us. And in different organizations throughout the country, there are boxes where these can be deposited, and these will be collected by women's groups or organizations that are not duty bearers and who do not provide services. So we're trying to really expand the coverage and the opportunity for persons to also make reports when they do try to access and they don't receive the services.
I really think that's innovative. It's good to hear that. I mean, we need to push that more, that people know that they can actually make the report in writing for free, mailed for free through the post office. Because one of the concerns I was having is that with as our economic crisis continues because of the pandemic, one of the services or one of the areas where budgets are usually cut is social services. So I was wondering how you all will cope with that, knowing that you already have limited budget. There's a crisis, there's an economic crisis, whether we want to admit it or not.
Yes.
But yet, while that crisis is going on, the incidences of violence is even more, because one of the incidents is also financial violence,
Yes,
psychological violence, and so on. So you all are now placed in a position where funding may be an issue. Have you all already been facing any issue with funding? Or are you concerned as we continue how we deal with the issue of funding of your department and other areas that deal with these very critical issues?
Well, honestly, funding will always be an issue. Even without COVID, funding is still an issue because the funding that is required to address social issues, it's a lot. And so that we have to be very creative in how do we then use what we get. And so one of the things that we're doing more and more is really partnering with organizations, with civil society and also other government institutions to be able to see how do we get things done with less or no money. So for example, in terms of this partnership and providing the access to persons, because we know that they also struggle in terms of finances, mailing their forms free. Because at one point people say, well, it's only 25 cents. But honestly, 25 cents is a lot if you have to buy something for a child or mail a complaint form. So we are very happy to be able to partner with the Belize Postal Service. In addition to that, one of the things that we also were able to do, again through funding with Spotlight Project, is add an additional hotline so people can call free of cost. we already had the 0800 a way out. However, that was a BTL line. And so our smart customers had to have credit to be able to access that line free
Okay.
of cost. So now we've then worked and got another hotline through Smart so that now everybody has access to call the 0800 a way out to request urgent support from the police. And these lines are manned by the police department. In addition to that, one of the things we also thought of is even, for example, if you cannot make a call, but you can text or you have internet and you are able to send a WhatsApp message. Now we also got a phone, cell phone that people could also access to send a text to the police and request assistance as well. And through WhatsApp, that is what they would want to do.
And that number? What's that number?
672-9628.
672
9628.
9628. I hope they could put it up on the screen so that people know. 672
9628.
9628. We definitely will be having that up on our Facebook page and our different social
and we are
media
also
platforms.
again right, and so the National Women's Commission is working in developing, just sharing it out with partners. We're looking at sending it through WhatsApp. So if at any point, we have your cell phone and we send a WhatsApp with an infographic with information, we're asking partners, anybody, to share it out with people because we don't know at what point anyone will need it. And so we want to really socialize those numbers so that people are aware that they can access and call for help. And the good thing is in terms of requesting support from the police, it doesn't have to come directly from that individual. If a neighbor also sees that there's a danger, there could be possible, risk to life, to health, they can also do that because that allows for people to also request help, and then the police would have to go and ascertain the level of it.
Cynthia and Audrey, I know that time is not on our side, but at the same time, one of the things that we should always try to do is to nip things in the bud, which simply means that if a family is going through a hard time, they might just be reluctant to go somewhere, or probably they don't even know where to go to get some advice. So are we able to get that at the National Women's Commission? Where can we go if I know, especially
or
listening,
other partners.
or other partners indeed. Thank you so very much, Audrey. I'm listening to this, but within me, for the life in me, I just feel dramatic. I just want to react in the home, but I know for a fact that I want help. Where can I go?
Well, the Ministry of Human Development really and truly is the entity responsible for providing those type of services. So we have the Women and Family Support Department that provides support in terms of domestic violence and dealing with adults. So even looking at elder abuse as well, that's the department that people can go to for family support. And that's why if you notice the name has been restructured, the department has been restructured where it's not only the Women's Department, but rather the Women and Family Support Department. We have
Cynthia?
And we have the Community Rehabilitation Department that provides work support for at-risk youth and those in conflict with the law. So through the various departments, the three departments, the ministry provides those type of services to families in general. We don't provide direct services. We're more at the policy level and the coordination, but we do work whenever anybody calls the office, we direct them to the necessary spaces. And so it's one of the things that we're also working again in partnership with our international partners, such as
Well, one thing I'll say is that
right.
why I understand that their policy...
and so we're looking at having a data with all the organizations and specify what services they provide, because we know that maybe in Toledo, the organizations are different in terms of in comparison to Cayo. So we want to be able to develop that and also share it. It is something that has been worked on at different points by different organizations, and we hope to be able to finalize it and share it. We also be able to share the gender-based violence referral pathway that clearly outlines the steps of people can take in terms of reporting and accessing services to the police, health, and judiciary. And yes, even though it might be perfect, because unfortunately we're still leaving people behind, but at least it is something that is there. And as we continue working and amending and strengthening services and legislation, we want people to be aware of what exists, because I think that is sometimes we kind of miss it, even though work has been done. So we're trying to really increase the awareness, and that being one of the most expensive aspects of the work in terms of prevention. We're trying to do it not only in terms of the media, such as radio and television, but using WhatsApp, using social media, using organizations at the community level. And one of the things that we're working on in terms of the prevention aspect is engaging of men. And so the National Women's Commission, as one of the activities that is outlined in the National Gender and Gender-Based Violence Action Plan, is the development of a coalition of male advocates that then looks at men working with other men, because at the end of the day, most perpetrators are men. And so we need men to be a part of it. And so we're in the process. Last year, we had a barbershop forum that brought almost 100 men to look at what are some of the areas that need to be addressed. We've had some email discussions, like sending them materials for them to look at. And we have a list of approximately 45 men who are interested in being part of that coalition. They have signed on the pledge of nonviolence, but we have room for more, because we want to be able to then now take it into the communities. So this year, we're actually going to be having a training of trainers where we're going to be working hopefully with 100 men and giving them the tools, because
we have John here who will join.
You also need to have the capacity to do it. You need to be able to have the information. And John, John, you're welcome. I've extended the invitation, and really and truly, we need men who are willing to get their hands dirty. Because even though the National Women's Commission and S-Clan
no, of course,
are providing the support, at the end of the day, the hope is for a coalition to then take it out and become independent, and then they lead the work. So we're working with them at the beginning over a period of time, and then be able to then have them work on their own. And so we have a person who is widely trained in terms of working with masculinities and helping men to understand their role in ending gender equality, ending gender-based violence.
Cynthia,
so again, that is another initiative.
Cynthia, thank you for your contribution.
Yeah.
We are out of time.
Yeah, very.
Thank you. And I think as we take this break now, we're going to a second break. I just want people to know that while the court system right now is shut down in many ways because of COVID, the family court is not closed. It's like they are there for emergency cases, and anything dealing with violence or domestic violence, they are available. So please go there. They do a better job than some of you all think. They're there. They don't only do matters in court. They actually have counseling, and you could go to an officer. So we take a break, and when we come back, what are we dealing with?
When we come back, we'll be discussing actually the Live and Let Live Belize campaign. They'll be discussing the results from a public opinion survey. So we've got that and more when we come back to Open Your Eyes. So stay with us.
In these challenging times, the one thing that is certain is that the Belize Bank Limited is here for you. There is nothing more important than your health and safety, and we continue to make every effort to make banking safer for you. Our staff is working around the clock to make sure you can do your banking conveniently 24/7.